So before we get into how to prevent chargebacks, first we need to understand what is a chargeback. So back in the 70s, credit cards were not yet popular in the United States, primarily because of fear. People were simply afraid of getting ripped off by a dishonest merchant or someone stealing their identity. So the Fair Credit Billing Act of 1974 was instituted, and that gave credit card companies the right to charge back on a disputed transaction. Here's how it works. The customer calls up his or her issuing bank to dispute a transaction. That dispute then gets assigned a reason code by the issuing bank. Then the issuing bank sends that information over to the acquiring bank. So the merchant's bank or acquiring bank reviews that dispute, and if it has merit, the acquiring bank takes that money from the merchant, refunding the customer in full, and then in the process charges the merchant a chargeback fee. So for consumers, this created a bunch of peace of mind, right? You can use the convenience of credit cards without having to worry about any fraudulent transactions. But for merchants, especially e-commerce merchants, chargebacks are bad news. You essentially lose the money from the sale. You lose any shipping charges. You get a chargeback fee anywhere north of $25. Plus, if you get too many chargebacks on your merchant account, your acquiring bank will actually shut you down and you'll be out of business. So essentially, chargebacks are good for cardholders because added protection. It's good for the card networks like Visa and MasterCard because everybody uses their credit cards, but it's really bad for e-commerce merchants. So how can you prevent chargebacks? Remember the days in the grocery store when the cashier would ask you for your ID when checking out? Well, if you're wondering why they don't do that anymore, it's because grocery stores are not liable for card-present transactions so long as you're using that EMV chip. So essentially, you could go to the grocery store, spend $100, check out with the EMV chip, then 3 weeks later, call your bank, say, hey, I think someone stole my credit card, this grocery store transaction, I think it's fraud, and you'll get your money back, and the grocery store will not pay the bill on that. However, for card not present or CNP transactions, the liability for every single transaction is on the merchant. So if you own an e-commerce store, then your entire business is at risk of being charged back. This is where PAAY EMV 3D Secure comes in. So PAAY EMV 3D Secure takes that chargeback liability away from 70% of all transactions on your e-commerce site and puts that liability onto the issuing banks of the cardholders. So let's say you have an e-commerce site and I'm going to go on that site and buy something with my Chase Sapphire Preferred card. So Chase is my issuing bank and it's a Visa card. So as I type my credit card in, as soon as I hit the expiration date, so the credit card number and expiration date are on the page, PAAY EMV 3DS grabs that information, grabs the amount of purchase from the page, and uses that info to talk to Chase on my behalf. Now, meanwhile, Chase knows everything about me as a buyer. They know my IP address, they know my laptop, they know what time of day I buy things and what types of things I buy. So they're able to check out the transaction in real time behind the scenes without any kind of text message or two-factor authentication. And if it looks good to them, then they're going to give the thumbs up. And the way they do that is they send back a couple of fields, 3DS tokens, let's call them, back to the checkout page. Then when I hit buy on the checkout page, that information gets sent to the gateway and then again to the processor. So it stays with the payload all the way through. 3 weeks later, let's say I call my bank and I say, hey, I didn't authorize that transaction. Well, if that's CAVV and ECI, those 3D Secure tokens, if those 3D Secure tokens are on that transaction, I might get my money back, but it's not going to come from the merchant. It's not going to come from that e-commerce business that I bought from, and it's not going to be there's not going to be a chargeback fee given to that merchant, and it's not going to count against the merchant's hard count. Chase, my issuing bank, is going to completely pay the bill. There are a few exceptions I should note that this only is covered on fraudulent reason codes. So reason code 10.4, 4837, 4863, those fraudulent codes are protected if it's 3D secured and the buyer calls and says it's fraud, it's protected. But if the buyer says goods and services not rendered or item not as described, it won't be protected. But other than that, if it's 3D secured and it's fraud, then you are protected. So does your e-commerce site have a lot of chargebacks due to fraud? If so, I've linked in the description of this video my calendar. It's through Calendly. Just click that link. You can find a good time. I'll personally set you up and get you guys started so you can keep scaling your business and protect yourself against fraud. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.